It was just another Tuesday. The kind of day that felt predictable, controlled, the way I had built my life to be. My morning had started the same as always, an early workout, a quick espresso from the cafe downstairs, and a seamless drive to the high-rise office where I spent my days managing investment portfolios for clients who trusted me to build their wealth. By mid-morning, I was deep in numbers, flipping through projections and market trends, completely absorbed in the quiet rhythm of my success. Then my phone lit up. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. I usually did. Spam calls were relentless, and anyone who mattered to me had my number saved. But something made me pick up. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe fate. Or maybe it was just a random decision that would rip open a part of my past I had spent years locking away. Hello? The air conditioning hummed softly in the background. The office was still, except for the faint clatter of keyboards and the distant murmur of colleagues on calls. But in that moment, everything else faded away. A pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 12 years. Harper, it's your mother. I felt it before I could process it, a cold, twisting sensation in my gut. A rush of emotions I didn't want. My fingers tightened around my pen, my breath stilled. 12 years. 12 years since I walked out. 12 years since they slammed the door on me. 12 years since I learned what it meant to be truly alone. The sound of her voice dragged me straight back to a past I had fought to escape. I leaned back in my chair, staring blankly at the financial reports in front of me. The same numbers that had always made sense, the same logic that had given me control over my future, now blurred. My office, my sanctuary, felt suddenly smaller. I gripped my pen tighter. My voice came out cold, sharp. What do you want? There was another pause, then a shaky breath. Your father, he's very sick. The doctors say he doesn't have much time. We need you to come home. Home. The word landed like a punch to the ribs. That house wasn't my home. Not anymore. Maybe it never had been. My gaze drifted to the modern art on the wall, the one I had bought simply because I could. Outside my window, the city moved as usual. People on lunch breaks. Cars honking. Life went on. But inside me, time had stopped. My father was sick. A dozen different emotions fought for control, but the strongest one was anger. Not sadness. Not worry. Not regret. Just the deep, unshakable resentment of a daughter who had been discarded when she was no longer convenient. They hadn't called when I graduated. They hadn't called when I got my first job, my first promotion, my first $1 million client. They hadn't called in 12 years. And now, suddenly, I was needed. A part of me wanted to laugh. I let the silence stretch long enough for her to feel it. I'll think about it, I finally said. Then, before she could add whatever guilt-ridden plea she had prepared, I hung up. For a moment, I just sat there, the phone still in my hand, my pulse thudding against my ribs. I should have been able to shake it off. I had built a life where they didn't matter anymore. A life where I was in control. Where no one could take anything from me. And yet, just one call, one voice from my past, had cracked something open. I set my phone down and reached for my coffee, but it had gone cold. Just like the memories I had worked so hard to bury, memories that, despite my best efforts, were surging back. I remembered birthdays where Lily got the biggest presents, while I was told to be grateful. I remembered watching my father write a check for her expensive piano lessons, while telling me there wasn't enough for my college fund. I remembered coming home to find my suitcases on the doorstep, my key no longer working in the lock. I thought I had buried it all. I thought I had moved on. But grief doesn't always come in the form of sadness. Sometimes it looks like anger. Sometimes it looks like a girl who once begged to be seen and was instead pushed aside. 12 years. And now they wanted me back. Not because they missed me. Not because they were sorry. Because they needed something. My jaw tightened. My fingers curled into fists. The Harper they knew no longer existed. The one they threw away had built herself into something they could never break again. But that didn't mean I wasn't going to hear them out. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I wanted to hear them ask. Because this time I would be the one holding the power. Have you ever felt completely blindsided by someone you trusted? Comment 111 if you know that pain. Growing up, I learned early that love in my family came with conditions. I was the firstborn, the dependable one, the child they never worried about. And because of that, I was never the priority. From the moment my sister Lily was born, 2 years after me, it was obvious that she was the sun around which our family orbited. She was delicate, precious, sensitive, as my mother often reminded me. I, on the other hand, was expected to be strong. It started small, almost unnoticeable. Birthday parties, where Lily's cake was always bigger, her gifts more extravagant. Mine were practical, things I needed, not things I wanted. A winter coat instead of a new toy. School supplies instead of a bike. I was told I should be grateful. That I was setting an example. That I was older and should understand. I tried. I really did. But the cracks in their love showed in 1,000 tiny ways. Like the time in 3rd grade when I finally got my hands on a beautiful set of colored pencils. I had begged Mom for them for weeks, but the answer had always been no, until I saved my own allowance to buy them. The very next day, Lily saw them and wanted them for herself. She didn't ask. She simply took them. When I protested, my mother's voice rang through the house. Harper, don't be so selfish. Let your sister have some. You know how she gets. Lily smirked behind her back, knowing she had won. Or the summer I spent weeks caring for a stray kitten I had found behind our house. I named her Daisy, built her a small shelter, snuck her bits of food when Mom and Dad weren't looking. One afternoon, Lily decided she wanted a kitten too. But instead of adopting another, she simply claimed mine. She held Daisy too tightly, ignored my protests, and, inevitably, the cat scratched her. Lily ran inside, screaming. I was grounded for a week. Harper, why didn't you tell her how to hold it properly? Mom scolded as she took Lily out for ice cream to make her feel better. I should have seen it then. The pattern. The imbalance. But I wanted so desperately to believe that this was normal. That if I was good enough, responsible enough, understanding enough, they would eventually see me. But that moment never came. By the time I was a teenager, the favoritism was impossible to ignore. Lily was still the center of the universe, and I had become the family's built-in caretaker. When she needed rides to friends' houses, I was expected to drive her. When she needed help with homework, I was the one who stayed up late, making sure she understood the material, though when she did well, it was her success alone. The most infuriating part? I never got that same consideration in return. When I worked late shifts at Joe's Cafe, to save money, no one stayed up waiting for me. When I aced my exams, there were no celebrations, no proud declarations. Lily got praise for simply existing. I had to earn every scrap of approval. The moment that finally shattered the illusion came at 16. I had saved for months, working extra shifts, counting every tip, to buy myself a smartphone. It wasn't even a high-end one, just a simple, budget model, but it was mine. I remember the way I carried the small box home, holding it carefully like it was the most precious thing in the world. The second I walked through the door, Lily's eyes locked onto it. I want one, she whined, reaching for it. I pulled it away. Then save up. That's what I did. Her face scrunched in frustration. That's not fair. And then, like clockwork, she screamed. My parents came running, concern written all over their faces. Not for me. Never for me. What's going on? Mom demanded, already reaching for Lily as if she had been attacked. Harper bought a phone, and she won't let me have one. Lily wailed, tears rolling down her cheeks, her voice the perfect mix of heartbreak and betrayal. I stood there, stunned. Was she serious? I worked for this. I saved for this. Surely my parents would see how ridiculous she was being. But instead, my father's face hardened. Harper, why are you being selfish? My mother sighed, shaking her head. We raised you to be better than this. You're supposed to love your sister. The words landed like a slap. Love? Did they love me? Because if they did, how could they ask me to keep giving when they had never given anything back? I held the phone tightly in my hands. My throat felt thick, my chest tight. I could have given in. I could have let them guilt me into handing it over, just like I had 1,000 times before. But something in me snapped. No, I said, my voice firmer than it had ever been. I earned this. It's mine. The look of disappointment on my father's face was instant. We expect better from you, Harper. Mom pursed her lips. This isn't how a family treats each other. And Lily just stood there, smug, knowing that in the end, she would always be the one they chose. I turned on my heel and walked to my room, locking the door behind me. That night, as my parents tried to talk to me through the door, I opened my laptop and typed one thing into Google. Out-of-state colleges. It was the first time I ever let myself dream of a life where I wasn't second place. A life where I came first. For the first time, I saw my family for what they truly were. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted an extra. Someone who could fill in the gaps, make sacrifices, do the work so Lily never had to. I wasn't going to be that person anymore. The next 2 years, I played the part of the dutiful daughter, but inside, I was already gone. Every late-night shift, every penny saved, every application submitted, everything was building toward my escape. I no longer waited for their approval. I no longer sought their praise. I was done being the afterthought. And I was going to prove to them that I didn't need them to succeed. Have you ever sacrificed so much for someone, only to feel like it meant nothing? Comment 222 below. I still remember the way the envelope felt in my hands, thick, official, filled with the promise of everything I had worked for. My acceptance letter to the finance program at Arizona State, one of the best in the country. It wasn't just an opportunity. It was my escape. For once, I let myself believe that this would be the moment my parents saw me. That they would finally acknowledge my hard work, my sacrifices. That maybe, just maybe, they would be proud of me. I practically flew through the front door, grinning as I held the letter up like a trophy. I got in. I announced, my heart pounding in my chest. The finance program at Arizona. And they're offering me a partial scholarship. I expected excitement. Maybe even celebration. Instead, Mom muted the TV. Dad barely glanced up from his laptop. Lily didn't even look away from her phone. That's nice, honey, Mom said, her tone oddly neutral. Something inside me deflated. I waited. Waited for a smile, for a hug, for any sign that this mattered to them the way it mattered to me. Nothing. I swallowed hard. With Grandpa's college fund, I'll be able to cover the rest of the tuition. Silence. A tight, uneasy look passed between Mom and Dad. Dad cleared his throat. About that money, he shifted in his chair. It's gone. The room spun. I blinked. What do you mean gone? Mom smoothed her skirt, not meeting my eyes. Investment opportunities came up. I felt my stomach drop. Investment opportunities. I knew exactly what that meant. I had seen the evidence for years, the way Mom's jewelry collection had mysteriously expanded, the new golf clubs that Dad had justified as networking tools, the designer bags Lily flaunted every time she walked through the door. You spent it? My voice was shaking. Dad sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. We had to make some choices. Choices. Like choosing luxury over my education. Like choosing Lily over me, again. I clenched my fists. And what about Lily's tuition? Dad actually chuckled. "Oh, we've got that covered." The words hit like a slap. I had always known I was the afterthought, the responsible one, the one they expected to fend for herself. But this? This was different. This wasn't just favoritism. This was theft. I had been sitting at the table when Grandpa told them. I had heard him say it with my own ears. Make sure both girls get their schooling. That's what this money is for. And they had taken it. For themselves. For Lily. But not for me. My breath came fast, my hands trembling at my sides. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Grandpa left that money for both of us. And you spent my share, but saved Lily's?" "Don't be dramatic," Mom scoffed. "You'll find a way. You're good at figuring things out." I let out a hollow laugh. "Right. Because that's my role, isn't it? Figure things out while Lily gets everything handed to her." Lily finally looked up from her phone, rolling her eyes. "Ugh, Harper, don't make a big deal out of this." I turned to her, my blood boiling. "You knew, didn't you?" She shrugged. "They told me a while ago." I stared at her. She knew. And she had never said anything. I had spent years bending over backward for her, giving up my time, my belongings, my childhood. And when it came time for her to stand up for me? She hadn't even hesitated. I looked back at my parents, at their indifferent faces, and something inside me shattered. All these years, I had told myself that maybe there would come a day when they would treat me as an equal. That they would see me. That day was never coming. I stood up so fast, my chair scraped against the floor. "I hope Lily enjoys her education," I said coldly. "Because she's the only daughter you have left." Mom's mouth fell open. "Harper." I didn't stay to listen. I stormed upstairs, my pulse pounding in my ears, and yanked open my closet. I grabbed my suitcase from the corner, my movements sharp and mechanical. Clothes, toiletries, important documents, every piece of my life that I refused to let them control. As I zipped the suitcase shut, I heard Mom's voice from downstairs. "You're acting like a child. You're not thinking clearly." No. For the first time I was thinking perfectly clearly. I walked down the stairs, my suitcase rolling behind me, my heart racing. My parents stood at the base of the stairs, blocking the door. Dad crossed his arms. "You're being ridiculous." "No," I said steadily. "I'm done being used." Mom's voice hardened. "If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back." I met her eyes. And for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. I wasn't planning to. I pushed past them, yanked open the door, and stepped into the cool night air. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I didn't look back. That night, I slept in my car. I stared up at the ceiling, my heart pounding in the deafening silence. And for the first time since I was a little girl, I let myself cry. Not for them. Not for the childhood I had lost. I cried for the girl who had spent 18 years begging for love from people who were never going to give it. By morning, I had wiped my tears away. I had a life to build. What would you have done in my shoes? Comment 333 and let me know. I sat in my car outside my childhood home for exactly 3 minutes before I forced myself to start the engine and drive away. I didn't have a plan, no roadmap for what came next. All I had was my suitcase in the back seat, a few $100s in my bank account, and the suffocating realization that I had no home to go back to. My hands were still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the finality of it all. The sheer coldness in my mother's voice when she told me to figure things out on my own. The way my father dismissed me like I was a burden instead of his daughter. The casual cruelty of Lily, who had stood there, untouched by guilt, perfectly content to let me be thrown away like I was nothing. I pulled into a gas station parking lot, my fingers hovering over my phone screen. There was only one person I could call. Aunt Rachel. I hesitated. She was my mother's sister, after all. But unlike my mother, Rachel had always been warm, always looked at me like I mattered. Growing up, she had been the only adult who saw through the act, who noticed the way I was treated differently. My thumb hovered over her name before I pressed the call button. She picked up on the second ring. Harper? The moment I heard her voice, the dam broke. I told her everything, how they had stolen my college fund, how they had locked me out of the house, how I had nowhere to go. She didn't hesitate. Stay right where you are. Mike and I are coming to get you. Less than an hour later, her car pulled up beside mine. Uncle Mike stepped out first, loading my suitcase into their trunk without a word. Aunt Rachel wrapped me in a hug so tight, so full of warmth, that I nearly broke down all over again. Sweetheart, she murmured. I'm so sorry. That night, I sat at their kitchen table, staring at the check Rachel slid across the wood surface toward me. It's not much, she admitted. But it'll help cover what the scholarship doesn't. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I can't take this. You will take it, Uncle Mike said firmly. And one day, if you want, you can pay it forward to someone else. I stared down at the check. $30,000. Enough to cover what my parents had stolen from me. I met Rachel's eyes, my voice shaking. I'll pay you back. Every penny. She smiled. I know you will. And I would. Because this wasn't just about college anymore. This was about proving to them, and to myself, that I didn't need them. That I would become something greater than they ever imagined. The quiet rebuild. College wasn't easy. I juggled classes and a part-time job at the university's financial office, stretching every dollar. While my classmates went on weekend trips and shopped without checking price tags, I lived on instant ramen and second-hand textbooks. I barely slept. I had no safety net, no home to return to if I failed. Failure was not an option. I pushed harder than everyone else. I sat in the front row of every lecture, asked questions, networked with professors. I took extra courses, worked through summers, and landed every internship I could get my hands on. And all the while, I never reached out to my parents. Not once. They had made their choice. Now, I was making mine. By my senior year, I was top of my class, already fielding job offers from some of the biggest financial firms in the country. Then, 2 months before graduation, I got the offer that changed everything, a junior position at Goldman Investment Partners. The starting salary alone was more than my parents had probably ever expected me to make. I called Aunt Rachel the moment I signed the contract. I did it, I whispered, still in shock. I got the job. She let out a choked laugh. Of course you did. 12 years later. I never went back. Not for the holidays, not for birthdays, not even when old family friends reached out, trying to pull me into nostalgia. Instead, I built a life they couldn't touch. I worked 16-hour days, climbed the ranks, and by 27, I was managing million-dollar portfolios. My name was in finance magazines. My salary tripled. I moved into a high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and bought my first luxury car, a sleek black Mercedes that made me smile every time I saw it in the parking garage. I repaid Aunt Rachel and Uncle Mike every cent they had given me, despite their protests. I never blocked my family on social media, but I never checked their profiles either. If they wanted to see my success, they were welcome to. But I wasn't looking back. And then, one morning, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Hello? There was a hesitation on the other end. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in 12 years. Harper, it's your mother. I felt my entire body go still. I hadn't thought about them in years, at least, not in a way that made me feel anything. But in that moment, something dark and bitter coiled in my chest. I let the silence drag, just to hear her squirm. What do you want? She took a shaky breath. Your father, he's sick. The doctors say he doesn't have much time. I exhaled slowly, staring out at the city skyline through my window. 12 years of silence. 12 years of nothing. And now, suddenly, they needed me. I let the weight of that sink in. The Harper they had thrown away at 18 would have jumped at this moment, desperate for any scrap of connection. But the woman I had become? I wasn't desperate for anything. Still, I was curious. I wanted to see them. I wanted to hear them ask. And this time I would be the one in control. Fine, I said, my voice unreadable. I'll think about it. Then, I hung up before she could respond. Have you ever had to stay silent while planning your next move? Comment 444 if you know that feeling. 12 years had passed, but stepping back into that house felt like stepping into a time capsule of my own pain. The air smelled the same, vanilla candles and stale coffee. The furniture, the outdated floral wallpaper, even the old wooden clock ticking against the far wall, nothing had changed. But I had. I didn't belong here anymore. My mother opened the door before I could knock, her eyes scanning me with something between awe and apprehension. She had aged, more wrinkles, streaks of gray in her hair, but her expression was still the same. That carefully constructed mask of self-righteousness, the one she had always worn when making excuses for treating me like an afterthought. Harper, she breathed, reaching as if to hug me. I didn't move. She hesitated, then forced a smile. You look successful. I stepped inside without responding, my heels clicking against the floor. Where was the warmth? The regret? The recognition of what they had done? It wasn't there. Instead, I saw calculation. She was trying to figure out how to use me. Where's Dad? I asked. In the living room. She hurried ahead, leading me to the same room where, over a decade ago, I had been told my college fund was gone. And there he was. The man who had dismissed me, stolen from me, cast me out the second I stopped being convenient. Now, he was small, frail, slumped in his recliner like a deflated balloon. His skin was pale, his once commanding presence reduced to a mere shadow. His eyes brightened when he saw me, but they still carried that quiet authority, the belief that no matter what had happened, I was still his daughter, still bound by the invisible chains of duty and obligation. You came, he rasped, as if it were inevitable. I sat across from him, crossing my legs, waiting. Mom perched on the armrest beside him, wringing her hands. I knew this act. The helpless mother, the devoted wife, the neglected parent seeking redemption. I wasn't falling for it. Dad coughed, struggling to sit up straighter. I need you to promise me something, he said, voice weak but steady. Take care of Lily. I froze. So that was why they called me. Not because they missed me. Not because they were sorry. Because they needed a replacement for the man who had enabled Lily her whole life. Mom clasped her hands together, eyes pleading. Harper, you're doing so well. You have more than enough. Surely, you can spare a little. I turned to Lily, who had just waltzed into the room in designer heels, her expensive perfume suffocating the air between us. She had barely changed. Same perfectly manicured nails. Same entitled expression. She was older, sure, but she carried herself the way she always had, with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. She flipped her hair, tilting her head. It's not fair that you have so much and I don't. I felt a slow, sharp laugh bubble up in my throat. Fair? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You want to talk about fair? I stood, letting the weight of my presence settle over them. Fair was watching my parents throw away my future while protecting hers. Fair was being locked out of my own home with nothing but a suitcase and a handful of cash while she lived comfortably in a house that should have been ours equally. Fair was me clawing my way up from nothing while she had everything handed to her. No, I said, voice like steel. I'll pay for Dad's medical bills. But I will not support Lily. Lily's face twisted in anger. You've always been selfish. No, I said coldly. I've always been your backup plan. And I had just taken myself out of the equation. The final blow. My mother's lips parted, and I knew what was coming. The guilt, the manipulation, the "how can you do this to your family" speech. But I was ready. I reached into my bag, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the coffee table. Mom frowned. "What's that?" "Proof." I leaned back, letting them sweat. "Of where the college money really went." Lily shifted uncomfortably. Mom's fingers trembled as she opened the envelope, flipping through the photocopies inside. Bank statements. Receipts. A trail of transactions that led directly to luxury items, vacations, and Lily's education. I had spent years collecting it. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I knew, deep down, that one day, they would try to rewrite history. Dad looked at the papers, then at me, his face drained of color. "You think I wouldn't find out?" I asked, voice calm. "That I wouldn't know you stole from me?" Mom started shaking her head. "Harper, I don't want an apology," I interrupted. "I want you to sit in the truth of what you did." Lily scoffed. "This is ridiculous. What do you want us to do? Give you the money back?" I smiled. "You don't have any money to give back, do you?" And the silence confirmed it. This house, the one they had chosen Lily over me for, was on the verge of foreclosure. The luxury? The comfort? It was gone. I had come here expecting to face the giants of my past. Instead, I found ruins. And I felt nothing. Lily's voice broke through the silence, sharp and panicked. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away?" I turned to her, my gaze unwavering. "I did that 12 years ago. You just didn't notice." I picked up my bag and walked to the door, pausing only once. "I wish you the best," I said. And for the first time, I truly meant it. Because the best thing that could ever happen to Lily was learning what it meant to stand on her own 2 feet. And the best thing that could ever happen to me? Was finally closing this door. Do you think they got what they deserved? Comment 555 if you felt that justice was served. I knew my mother would lash out. That was the one predictable thing about all of this. The very next morning, I woke up to messages, some from distant relatives, some from old family friends I hadn't spoken to in years. "Have you seen what your mother posted? Is this true? How could you leave your father like that?" I didn't even have to check to know what she had done. Still, I clicked on her profile, already expecting the worst. And there it was. A long, pitiful post about how her ungrateful daughter had abandoned her dying father, how I had turned my back on my family in their time of need. She painted herself as the devoted wife, the heartbroken mother, struggling to hold everything together while her cruel, heartless daughter lived in luxury without a care in the world. The comments were flooded with sympathy, with people calling me selfish, asking how I could be so cold. And for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. No urge to defend myself. Because I knew the truth. And I knew exactly how to show it. I took my time. I gathered everything, old messages, screenshots, bank statements, the recorded call where my mother all but admitted they had stolen my college fund. I laid it all out, piece by piece, and when I was done, I posted my version of the story. It wasn't written with anger. There was no hatred in my words. Just facts. Cold, clear, undeniable facts. And the internet exploded. People who had once ignored the favoritism, the injustice, the cruelty, they couldn't ignore it anymore. Distant relatives reached out, some apologizing, others sharing their own experiences of being cast aside or manipulated by my parents. My mother tried to defend herself, but every comment she made, every excuse she spun, was met with undeniable proof of her lies. For once in her life, the truth was louder than her manipulation. And then, as quickly as it began, she vanished. The post was deleted. Her profile was set to private. The messages stopped. And I realized something. For years, I had lived with this tiny, lingering ache inside me, the idea that one day, maybe, she would understand. That she would regret the way she treated me. But the truth was, she didn't want redemption. She wanted control. And when she realized she couldn't have it anymore, she did what she had always done. She ran from the truth. Goodbye, Dad. My father passed away 6 months later. I wasn't invited to the funeral. I heard about it through Aunt Rachel, who called me one evening with a soft sigh and the quiet words, "Your father passed today." I sat with that news for a long time, staring out over the city skyline from my apartment window. I had spent so many years resenting him, holding on to the weight of what he had done. But in that moment, I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt tired. So, I sent a bouquet. White lilies, the same flowers he had bought for my mother every anniversary. The card simply read, "Goodbye, Dad." I didn't sign my name. There was nothing left to say. The aftermath. 4 months after, I kept expecting the other shoe to drop. I had spent my whole life bracing for the next betrayal, the next heartbreak, the next moment where everything I built would be ripped away from me. But nothing happened. The world moved on. And so did I. My mother and Lily faded from my life like a bad dream. I heard through family gossip that the house had been sold, that Mom had struggled to maintain her lifestyle without my father's income. That Lily had tried, briefly, to find work, but quickly abandoned the idea when it became clear that she wouldn't be making the same kind of money she was used to spending. I didn't feel sorry for them. I didn't feel anything for them. And that was the real victory. Not the money I had made, not the success I had built, but the freedom of no longer needing their approval. The weight of their expectations, their manipulations, their disappointments, it was gone. I had spent my entire childhood waiting for them to love me the way I deserved. Now, I realized I had been asking the wrong people for love. A different kind of family. The first time I truly felt at peace was on a quiet Sunday afternoon at Aunt Rachel's house. It was one of our usual family dinners, something we had started years ago, a tradition of laughter and warmth and real love. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, the sound of clinking plates and cheerful conversation wrapping around me like a familiar embrace. Aunt Rachel sat across from me, watching me with the same gentle kindness she always had. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded. And for the first time, I meant it. I looked around the table, at Uncle Mike telling some ridiculous story, at Rachel's youngest daughter rolling her eyes at her dad's jokes, at the home filled with light. This was my family. Not the people who shared my blood, but the people who chose me. The people who loved me without conditions, without expectations, without demands. And as I sat there, surrounded by real love, I realized something. For years, I had believed that walking away meant losing something. But I hadn't lost anything. I had gained everything. Because peace? Peace is knowing you don't have to beg for love. It's knowing that the people who are meant to be in your life will never make you earn their care. I spent years fighting for a place in a family that never saw me. Now, I had one that did. And that was more than enough. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you love to protect yourself? Share your story in the comments below. For so long, I believed that family meant loyalty. That no matter what happened, no matter how many times I was cast aside, dismissed, or treated as an afterthought, I had to hold on. I had to prove my worth, to fight for a place in their lives. Because that's what love was, right? But love isn't supposed to feel like a debt you can never repay. It isn't supposed to come with conditions, with strings attached, with an unspoken rule that you must always be the one to sacrifice. It took me years to understand that walking away wasn't selfish. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't something to feel guilty about. It was survival. When I cut ties with my parents and Lily, I thought I was losing everything. I thought I was leaving behind a part of myself that I could never get back. But in reality, I wasn't losing anything, I was freeing myself. Because the truth is, not everyone who shares your blood is meant to be your family. Family isn't about DNA. It's about who shows up for you. And the moment I stopped begging for love from people who were never willing to give it freely, I found something so much better. I found myself. 3 months after my father's funeral, I got a voicemail from Lily. "Harper, can you help me? Just until I get on my feet?" Her voice was different, less entitled, more desperate. For a brief moment, I wondered if she had changed, if losing the safety net of our parents had finally forced her to grow up. But then I thought about the years of manipulation, the endless ways she had taken without ever giving back. I thought about the house she had once locked me out of, the money they stole without a second thought, the way she had stood by as I was cast aside. And I deleted the message. Some bridges deserve to burn. Not out of hatred, not out of spite, but because some people will only ever love you when they need you. And that is not love. But others? The bridges I built with Aunt Rachel and Uncle Mike? The ones I built with the friends who became family? Those only grew stronger. Because love, the real kind, isn't something you have to chase. It isn't something you have to earn. Love is given. Freely, willingly, without conditions. And the greatest act of love I ever gave myself was choosing me. I spent years believing that I wasn't enough. That I had to prove my worth. That I had to accept whatever scraps of affection my family was willing to offer. But not anymore. Now, I know the truth. I am enough. I always was. And so are you. No one has the right to make you feel small. No one has the right to take advantage of your kindness, to make you believe that you are only worthy of love when you are useful to them. So if you are holding on to people who drain you, who make you feel like you are never enough, let go. Because I promise you, real love exists. Real family exists. But you will never find it if you are too busy holding on to those who do not deserve you. Have you ever had to fight to reclaim your power? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because we all deserve to choose ourselves.